Should PlayStation fire Hermen Hulst, the CEO of the studio's business group? Now, I'm sure a lot of people would be very quick to agree that yes, absolutely, let's get him out of there, especially in light of the Bluepoint cancellation and closure news and everything else going on during this PlayStation 5 console cycle, and that it's been quite turbulent with a lot of investment for live service games, cancellations, studio acquisitions that led to game cancellations and closures of those studios. So we know it's been very turbulent, and PlayStation fans at this point are diehard PlayStation fans are just so up to here with it, right? Like, let's get this guy out of here. Let's move on. Hermen Hulst has been quite bad at the job. And so let's have a conversation about Hermen Hulst and how well they've been doing leading PlayStation studios since 2019. Actually, they've had somewhat of a different role, like a VP role for PS Studios. Previously, this would have been Worldwide Studios back in when he took the role on in 2011, and he was still doing that next to managing Guerrilla Games, if I remember correctly. So he's been somewhat involved for actually quite a long time, and that was probably the path he took to get the head of PS Studios in 2019. And then, as we saw in 2024, the co-CEO role of SIE, then that was rearranged a year later to strictly CEO of the studio's business group, reporting to Hideaki Nishino. But the point is, he's been around for a little bit now, and so yeah, PlayStation fans are just simply over it. Now, before we get into the conversation, I feel like we have to, or at least I have to acknowledge this and let people know, like, I'm well aware of how this is a PlayStation channel, and anything I say about PlayStation that can sometimes be painted in a more positive light in a time where people are very mad. You know, people think I'm out here defending Sony or this, that, and the fourth. I try to stay as objective as possible. I try to be. And I think it should be perfectly clear ahead of time that opinion is always separate from trying to analyze something and just be truthful about what is going on in particular, right? My own personal take, to air that out immediately, Hermen Hulst at this point in time, for me, is very low on the PlayStation leadership totem pole. We've had a lot of people over the years throughout PlayStation's history, whether they were regional CEOs or CEO of the entire organization. You're talking your Sean Layden, your Shuhei, Jack Tretton, Andrew House. We've had a lot of names, Kaz Hirai, Kutaragi-san. There's just a ton, right? And so, I mean, out of all these people, yeah, like he ranks pretty low. Same with Jim Ryan, low for me on the totem pole there. But some of these people do have, I mean, there's a reason why they have these roles and why they've consistently delivered for PlayStation over how many years that they've been at the organization and turned it into the powerhouse in games that it has been 30 years onward. But you all know me at this point. If you've watched for a while, you know I like my single-player games. I don't care for live service or multiplayer titles. I'm old-fashioned. I like the older consoles. Like I live and breathe that stuff. You all know I don't care for all the initiatives that PlayStation has been doing nowadays. But we try to have an objective conversation and analysis about what PlayStation is doing nowadays. So having said that, let's talk about how Hermen has done so far. And this is where like it sucks because there has been so much bad stuff throughout PlayStation 5's hardware cycle that for a fan like me, there's not a lot to love. Now, I always try to be half full, optimistic, and remind people we've had single-player games, we've had those big tentpole releases that I love, and I've been thoroughly enjoying those games, but that's been next to all the live service stuff going on and the studio closures, and so in a vacuum, I think you look at Hermen Hulst, and it's quite easy to come to the conclusion that the guy should be fired and it's complete negligence on his part. And Bluepoint, undeniably, is just like, it's still a crazy thing as the dust has settled on that. There's been stuff coming out from a source that I don't think is 100% worth humoring in the here and now, but we're not even trying to dive back into the Bluepoint stuff. What I said on LTPS last Friday still, for the most part, holds true. Studios aren't assigned games, but if the organization wants a particular type of game, they might feel pressured to pitch that, and that's where it becomes a gray area. It's negligence on PlayStation's part, Hermen Hulst's part, to approve a game like that conceivably Bluepoint probably should have had no business doing, and they should have moved on to something else. And for a talented team, they should have stuck around, right? We've had these conversations prior. We know all the bad stuff. So I hate to have to be the guy here to like go through, oh, well, here's all the good things. But I guess that's what we're trying to answer here is like, how does he still have the job, right? How has he not been fired just yet? And for all I know, behind the scenes, maybe SIE is actually very unhappy. The board, the investors, like maybe it will come down soon, and perhaps Herman is on the chopping block. I don't know. I mean, the speculation on my part right now is analyzing the good and seeing like, was this enough? Is this why he still has the job? We all know a lot of these suits, they tend to fall forward. It looks that way, but when you look at numbers, you start to see a different story. Now, in the context of Herman's job, you don't have to remind everyone how successful PlayStation 5 is right now as far as how much money it makes, how many consoles they sell. That's the platform side. There's the network side. They make a ton of money from MTX and things like this. But internally, for the in-house studios that Herman oversees, what is going on there? And that's where they're still good. Now, obviously, there's been plenty of first-party tempo titles that have released. Yote has been incredibly successful. It's just the issue becomes these games do take a substantial amount of time to make and release. And that's what's also kind of weird about trying to evaluate Hermen Hulst, is because the dev cycles are so long, you run into this very difficult, sometimes semantic argument of, what can we attribute to him, and is it even fair to judge it in a certain way when you consider how long it does take? For prior PlayStation leadership roles and generations, I mean, they got to oversee generations where games came out every 2-something years from the first-party teams, right? We are never going to have a Naughty Dog ship 3 Uncharted and a Last of Us in one console cycle. That's just gone. So there's no world where under Herman's leadership, you're going to be seeing the first-party teams ship games that often on a consistent basis. Unless you're potentially in Insomniac Games, they've done incredibly well. And that's part of what you do is you foster that talent, you let them work very creatively, and you give them some autonomy, and hopefully good products end up releasing. The other thing too, right, for that Shuhei to Herman transition is games getting signed but then released under Herman's watch. And that's where there's 2 spectrums there of, for example, Concord was signed by Shuhei, Helldivers 2 is signed by Shuhei, and we've got some pretty big extremes there of both end up being attributed and released under Hermen Hulst because he saw the investment, continued investment. Actually, Helldivers 2, it's been well documented now at this point that game had its dev cycle doubled as far as the time and money that was put into it. So Sony obviously believed in that project, and they saw it all the way through. And there's that next to Concord and Firewalk, acquiring Firewalk, and that game now being known as a sort of cultural icon of one of the biggest entertainment failures in history. Now, Helldivers 2 isn't exactly a Fortnite per se, but it's been incredibly successful. So there's 2 sides of the coin there of, they might have been signed by somebody else, but continuing to invest in them and releasing them are also under Herman's watch. Same for some scenarios where we actually do have a decent turnaround time for releasing titles, and that can be attributed to Astrobot with Team Asobi. Astrobot comes out within a 3-year dev cycle, and it's critically acclaimed. And that's something SIE is deeply considerate of, is how well their titles are received. They want those awards, those big Metacritic scores, and that's probably a big thing that, sort of backs Herman for keeping the job or falling forward. Again, he might lose it tomorrow, and I would actually be totally fine with that, because again, my personal take is he's low on the poll for me, but trying to sort of acknowledge how is he still around, like you can't excuse a massively critically acclaimed Game of the Year award winner was released under his watch, and that's probably something SIE deeply cares about. But more on the number side, we don't know what KPIs the guy has. Whatever sort of metric indicators he has to hit, I don't know if he's got a certain pay package that he's, achieving with the live service stuff, but there's no getting around something very particular that's showing up on their financial reports as of late, which is, you can look at the live service stuff, right? And God, years ago, they said they wanted to release 12 live service games by fiscal year 2025, which is now, we're right in the middle of that, or we're pretty much almost done. Everybody would probably agree it has been a nightmare with all these cancellations and closures. But the thing is, they are achieving, I'm not sure the exact metric they want to achieve, but they're hitting what they are trying to accomplish here, which is consistent revenue on a quarterly basis from live service games. Fiscal year 2025, Q1 and Q2, they mentioned live service revenue contributed more than 40% of first-party software. Now, Q3 for FY 2025, they launched Ghost of Yote, which naturally that is going to spike first-party revenue. but they still had the line item on there of established live service titles like Helldivers 2 and MLB The Show contributed to the stable recurring revenue. So they are actually achieving what they are attempting to do, consistent revenue. The other awkward part about Herman's job, and anybody that has this role with the live service contention topic in particular, is that if he's not doing it, somebody else is going to. It's more about how they do it. Like, Shuhei probably would have resisted it, as he's said before, Sean Layden, but they have a responsibility to shareholders. Like, there is simply no getting around that 50% of PlayStation's video game revenue is from 10-something live service games. We all know why publishers and PlayStation is chasing it, so we don't have to go down that path again. But the path we do have to acknowledge here and deeply confront is that they have a responsibility to the board and shareholders of investing, making these games, and trying to release something. So I'm not trying to excuse Herman, but it's like if he's not doing it, somebody else is doing it. And I don't know what that different timeline looks like, or if somebody else fills that role, how are they going to approach it? That's why I often say the cancellations are like the best worst case scenario, because it's not a good situation to be in. It sucks, especially for fans that like single player games, but as we've acknowledged before, there are still single player games. They've invested more in single player games technically, and they're just a lot more disciplined now with canceling those games and moving on. I still stand by this. You would probably want to cancel something after 1 to 2 years knowing it's not going to go anywhere than to continue making it and releasing it. Dude, who wants those 12 live service games by this year's time, and then we have, 11 Concords and maybe a Helldivers 2? I think that looks substantially worse. Herman, it's really tough with Herman, dude. I think I would like to see new leadership step in and somebody to see what they can do. But even if somebody steps in tomorrow, it's not going to change overnight. It can't, because that's how long it takes for these things to meaningfully move and change anywhere. Should PlayStation fire Hermen Hulst? They might be happy with the dude. They might be happy, or they might be incredibly disappointed. But whoever fills in their shoes, I can't confidently say if it's going to even get better. That's maybe the more disappointing thing for what has been a very turbulent time in PlayStation history. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I'll see you all in my next video. You take it easy.